What are principles to use?
Yeah, so as a starting point, my name literally means principal. Growing up, I thought it meant principal as in the school principal. So I thought my destiny was already I was predestined to become a principal. But that's not the case, I found out. So I think it just means I'm like a man of principles. Either way, topic that's near and dear to my heart. And to me, principles are ways to live by. So um, guiding kind of lights, kind of like a lighthouse that gives you direction, especially when the going gets tough. Principles are values. To me, when I looked up the definition, it gave me something very specific, like guidance for your behaviors, other kind of similar definitions. And I realized the definition's not as important as what you decide that it's going to be, because these are, once again, principles you have to live by versus anyone else. So I think the definition is important, but also we have to think about what it actually means to us. So the way you ask the question makes a lot of sense. What would you say? What are principles to you?
Well, I'm a big fan of analogies. Um, and I mean, before I even my analogy, I'll say principles to me are rules to live by, heuristics, rules of thumb, which is what we talk about in this conversation. We talk about how can we best navigate life, knowing that no one really has any answers, but we can have some heuristics, some guides, some principles to help us navigate life, to be maximally happy and to achieve our dreams and goals. I think I recently heard the definition of a genius by a former Google executive, I forget his name, but he said to be a genius means that you get whatever you want. You are able to make your dreams, your reality come true. It's not about being smart in other ways. It's you can make your vision come true. So I think of principles as the guides, the bumpers in the bowling alley. You can think of it as you're riding a horse. The horse has its liders and the rider in the back. The horse knows can walk anywhere, but if it has very narrow vision, it can go down a specific road. And even though there are obstacles in that road itself, it can overcome those specific obstacles, but it's not gonna go that way or this way. It knows this is the way. And it just believes. It doesn't even acknowledge the other possibilities. So with that in mind, I've been thinking about principles a lot this past week, and I recently was posed the question, what are your 4 principles? In a book that I've been reading, The 177 Mental Toughness Secrets of the World Class by Steve Siebold. I really like this book. And he asked the question, what are your 5 core principles? And I ask you, Sid, what are your 5 core principles?
Yeah, it's funny because you asked me yesterday morning, and I just started riffing, and I think it was actually a really enlightening exercise because I've gone through something like this before and basically listed so many different principles that it got overwhelming. So I think 5 core principles is a good starting point. My 5 core principles: being open-minded, seeking adventure, being hospitable. I think one is a loaded one that I'm working on as well. Have fun. So make sure you play is kind of the one-word answer. Yeah, the 5th one is don't hesitate. And it's this idea of avoiding analysis paralysis. Where that comes from is some of actually the books that I've been influenced by. One of them's called Algorithms to Limbat. And it's about figuring out the optimal stopping point for a decision you're going to make. So one of the famous examples is the secretary problem. Basically, if you have to hire within the first 10 interviews, let's say you have to fill this role quickly, and you don't get the chance to anyone you've interviewed already, they're gone if you don't pick them right away. So in that situation, probability says that after that 3rd secretary, you should make a hire based on what you know. The concept, I think, makes a lot of sense because often we kind of boil the ocean, especially today in a world of so many options. So I really like this kind of guiding framework in terms of it's time to make a decision. Especially for someone like me, sometimes I get carried away and want to explore every single option. So there's a push and pull with even my other principle of being open-minded. I think Jeff Bezos said something about most decisions should be made at the 70% interval. So I just see it as somewhere in between these lines. You should make a decision instead of thinking I need to explore every single option. I think it's a dangerous game to play. So that guides me. The other ones I would say are also kind of based on my history. So being hospitable is really important to me because I think some of it comes from culture. You know, in the Indian culture, you're kind of taught to think I think the phrase is like your mehman is like God, guest is like God. So I grew up kind of thinking that. And when I say be hospitable, to me, it means if I have friends, let's say they're going through a rough time or something like that, I take care of them. I give them a home to like, you know, rest in, to kind of figure out their next chapter. And in general, I have like an open house policy. So, you know, you're welcome to come over anytime. And I want to make sure you have a great experience. So those are some of the important ones. Like I said, being hospitable, I think, is a dangerous line to kind of toe, because you don't want to be too hospitable and forget yourself and not have the chance to seek adventure and some of the other ones that are important to me.
Have fun.
Have fun. So you can't always have fun if you're, I don't know, if Andres stays over and sleeps in your bed every day, you know, that makes life pretty tough. Hint, hint. No, I'm just kidding. So yeah, all is to say, those are some of the principles I live by. And of course, this discussion is just starting. So of course, these principles will start to shift and become more nuanced. But for now, I think those are some really good guideposts. What are your principles?
I think the idea of having your principles shift, personally, I think that goes against the idea of principles to begin with. You want your principles to be solid, but in reality, they are malleable. They are something that might change as you mature, as you develop. But you want something to guide you. And if your guide is something that can just, you know, wobble over time, then maybe it's not a great guide and you have to reconsider it. So I think that's part of evolving, part of maturing. So my principles, which I would say are fairly new to me, and I've had these as mantras, as affirmations that I would say to myself for the past year as I travel the world. I would say things like, I am who I am. I treat myself with kindness and compassion. I am unwaveringly honest with myself and those around me. I would teach people how to juggle. I would teach people how to, you know, do whatever, like be nurturing to people. I would ask myself, what is my next thought, to bring myself to the moment. And when I was prompted with the question, what are your 5 core principles? They came to me fairly quickly based on those mantras, based on those affirmations. Being honest, being optimistic, being present, self-love, and nurturing. And the order of those kind of matters. For me, you know, being nurturing means that you are honest at the same time, but I will never waver on my honesty for the sake of nurturing, for example. So each one of those is wildly important to me, and it's important for me as I develop and as I become the person I want to be. I embody that person today by having those principles. And as I meet people, I have a blueprint, a guide to know whether that person is someone that is going to further resonate with my values, with my core principles, to further guide me along my path, or if it's someone that doesn't resonate, that destructively interferes with my path. Whether it be friendships, business relationships, or even personal relationships, like a partner. I want to make sure that I have someone that resonates with those, or at the very least, shows me that my principles might wobble. They show me that, okay, you want to be nurturing. Maybe nurturing is not your top principle. Maybe it's not in your real 5 core principles. Maybe you should consider this. So you said open-minded is one of your principles. and maybe that might have to wiggle itself into my 5 core principles if it really resonates with my desired vision of who I am really well. So it's a guiding principle.
Yeah. There's two pieces that I wanted to touch on. First is I really liked what you said. It's someone I want to be. I think it's really easy to fall into, at least for me, this thought that, oh, well, I'm not living these principles completely today. And it's a dangerous road to go on, right? You can easily, as the brain does, it can just conjure up all the reasons and examples of how you haven't lived up to those principles. But really, these are aspirational. It's who you want to become as well. So you can practice them today and also hope to continue in that path. So as we're talking about it, it's a guide. I don't think we have to say, and it's just like a watch out for anyone else, that don't let yourself stop yourself from having a principle just because you've had some rough moments or haven't been able to fully act on them in the past. The other is that I like what you were saying about kind of the push-pull of other people, how principles shape your relationships and even serve as a filter for who you want in your life. What I've realized is some of the friends I've had, some of those relationships drifted apart. And at first I was kind of sad. It's like, oh, why is this happening? I feel a little left out. There's FOMO involved. And then I realized we just don't share some of the same principles. I had taken off at least 2 or 3 months from drinking, actually after our trip to Brazil. And I realized some of these friendships were starting to not erode fully, but like starting to drift. We were starting to drift apart a little. And what I learned from that is over time, I started to accept it and realize what was really happening is some of our principles weren't matching up, our priorities even. So there was nothing wrong with that. That was just something I should accept and realize, hey, this is like another chapter of life or a reorientation of principles. And that means that some people won't follow that journey. Now, interestingly enough, I think it's also attracted new people, new opportunities, new activities, new behaviors that would not have been there if I had kept my previous principles. So in that sense, I think, like you were saying, I think they're very malleable. I think it's nice to have the posts in this present moment. I think it's very important that you're like grounded in here are my top 5. Here are the most important areas, aspects of my life that I want to consider when I make tough decisions. So just wanted to follow up on that. I think they're important.
Yeah, I think as you were saying that the whole idea of the resonating as you meet people, if you're having your principles resonate with other people and their principles resonating with you is really important, because by even acknowledging your 5 core principles, by having principles to begin with, whenever you talk to someone, you're not always thinking about your principles. No. But if someone breaks your principles or goes against it, you will immediately realize it. Oh, like if someone, you can even consider it with politics, right? If you are really leaning towards one direction and you meet someone that leans in the other direction, you will very quickly clash with that person. And you'll feel it. Even though you might not talk politics all the time, just that instance of clash will set you apart from that person. So if you have principles, you have those labels for yourself. Like, I am someone that's honest. I know labels aren't the most popular thing, but it's labels that you set for yourself. I'm honest. I'm optimistic. I love myself. I am present, and I am nurturing. If I meet someone who is dishonest, I catch them on a lie, immediately I'm like, wait a second. That person was lying. Like, I recently had a friend who evaded me for a few weeks saying he was sick every weekend. And, it could be that they're sick every weekend, and I will give them the benefit of the doubt. But now the thoughts start to pop into my mind, like, wait, why am I suddenly thinking maybe they're being dishonest? That's not someone I want to be with. I'd rather someone tell me They don't want to hang out. They don't want to spend time with me.
That's what I usually do. Yeah, just say, hey, I don't want to hang out with you.
Or I'm busy, or I need a rest day, or I want to spend time with my dog, or whatever. I get it. Everyone has their own lives. Everyone has their own schedule. When you try to control the outcome by lying, by saying, oh, if I say this, then the future will look like this, then not only are you not being present, but you're not being optimistic and you're not being self-loving. It's like, it's all of them for me. They're all kind of intertwined with each other. So whenever I catch someone doing a lie, for me, it's like, okay, that's not a person that I want to continue having in my life until they, change their ways, but I'm not going to pursue that further. I want to attract people who are honest as well. And every time I've been unwaveringly honest with people, they reflect it back to me. They reflect it back to me, or they don't resonate and they naturally are pushed away, either by themselves or by me.
Yeah, I'm glad you haven't caught me in one of my lies. So,
I mean, I've noticed. I'll be honest with you. I've noticed you lying to your friends, to other friends, like little white lies here and there. But it's not one of your core principles. So maybe it's not something that matters as much to you. Maybe to you, a white lie here and there, it's okay. To me, it's not. But I'm unwaveringly honest to you, and I expect the same back to me. And I haven't had you lie to me or caught you. And if I did, I would try to call you out on it because I do value our friendship. But if it grew out of control, then I would tell you, like, hey, I've noticed this. I'm being honest with you. I don't appreciate this, which is hard. It's one of the hardest things. But part of self-love for me and optimism is knowing that I can be myself. I can say anything as long as it's genuine and true, and I will be rewarded for it. I won't be penalized for telling you how I really feel, for saying I don't like the way you dress. I don't like this. Because what might happen is you might say, well, actually, there's some wobble in your thought. Here's the truth. You have a bad perspective. You might actually correct me. I'm in my own echo chamber in my head. And so it actually might be good to get a feedback from someone else.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think the principles in relationships is actually a really important thread to talk about. And maybe this is where we also talk a little bit about the takeaways. So we know we should have principles. We should try to prioritize and think about and reflect on them. It's not something I don't think we can do easily in the day-to-day, and we should carve out some time. It doesn't have to be a crazy commitment, right? You already have these floating in your heads. I think our lives guide us, our past lives actually guide us in terms of what principles stand out, and they formulate in our brains. So they're ready to go. It's just a matter of putting them on paper, talking to a friend, really understanding them. So I think that would be one of the pieces of advice I would give, because then they ground you, and then you're constantly reminded, whether it's through your mantras, which I think are very powerful. You have mantras to specifically kind of rewire your brain and prime yourself to remember, these are my principles. And to your point, that makes it easier when you go into a new relationship, an existing one, to know who and where to focus. The other one I think we talked about a little bit that I really enjoyed was this idea that when you meet someone new, you get past the small talk and you go to the big talk. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So I really like playing this game where it's when you meet someone, you avoid the most common questions. We've all done it. You're at a bar, you're at a gathering, you're at whatever business event, and people introduce themselves. Hey, nice to meet you. What's your name? Oh, my name is blah, blah, blah. Where are you from? Oh, I'm from Topeka, Kansas. Oh, that's cool. I've never been. Great. Where are you from? I'm from Lebanon. Oh, that's cool. I've never been. Is it any good? Yeah, it's great. And then the last one is, what do you do? I do this, I do that. It's really hard to relate to all of these things because these things don't really define who you are. So instead, I like to play the game, which is don't ask people what their name is, where they're from, and what they do. And it's really mind-boggling when you start playing this game because you have to talk about anything else. And you want to talk about these things. And you start talking to people and they default to this. They'll just jump into it. They'll say, oh, what's your name? Where are you from? What do you do? If you were talking to your group of best friends, those conversations would never happen. So if you want to connect with someone quickly and deeply, you skip the introductions. You talk to them as if they're already your friend. So you skip those initial conversations, they'll come up eventually. And if someone tries to initiate them, you can say, I like to play this game where I don't ask people where they're from, what their name is, and what they do. And sometimes they'll push back and say, like, oh, but why? I don't, but that's like super important to know. It's like fun to know. Let's try it. Let's see if we can connect on something else. And suddenly you're talking about music. You're talking about, how the leaves are changing. You might be talking about science. You might be talking about clothing, fashion, anything. And you're bonding. You're really finding the topics you really want to talk about. You're skipping all that small talk and you get into something deeper. And then you can start getting into the filters of your principles. What do you think about that?
What the thought that came to mind was that you're also avoiding bias in this way. If you ask someone where they're from and what they do for a living, it's very easy for our brains to say, that's not really my style. That's not really my thing.
Power dynamic as well.
There's a power dynamic as well. So if you can skip past that and move towards principles and larger order kind of ways of living, then now you can kind of step outside of that, whatever you want to call it, societal norms, anything else, because then you might find that you actually connect with people. And then later on, when you find out this information, what they do for work, where they live, then maybe like you start to appreciate and realize there's more in common than there isn't. Like you start to realize that as humans, we are all connected in some way, and those principles serve as a filter once again. So you can exit a conversation and kind of see past the first 30 days by of a friendship by saying, yeah, you know what? Our principles don't align. Like, it's not going to make sense. Sure, in the first 30 days, we do have the same job or in the same city. Cool. We can hang out a few times. But then you start to realize, hey, this person actually doesn't make sense for me. So I think it's a great way of eliminating bias and then also really forecasting what a friendship is going to look like and if it's something you should invest your time and energy in, because that's very important, right? So that was the immediate thought that came to mind.
When we were kids and you were at the playground and there's a kid building a sandcastle in the sand pit, you'd walk up to them and you'd say, hey, what do you do for a living? Where are you from? What's your name? No, you say, can I play? What's your favorite Pokemon? Like, you just jump straight into it. You start playing. And I know our conversation is like centered around principles, but a big part of it is knowing how to navigate life. This is really, how do we navigate life? Sure, we have the guides to help us navigate, but we want to navigate nicely. And when you're talking to someone new for the first time, a stranger, and you start off a conversation with, hey, what's your name? If the person has an exotic name, then that already might kind of cause some, destructive interference is what I like to call it. It doesn't resonate. Or if you're not from the same place, you might not be able to bind as well. Or even worse, you talk about what you do. And the conversation might go something like, oh, what do you do? Oh, I'm a senior executive at a finance trading firm. Wow, that's incredible. I'm a janitor. Suddenly you don't want to talk to each other. Maybe the janitor will want to talk to the senior executive because they could see themselves learning something from that. But if there is a power imbalance, it might throw everything off. Or a really wise senior executive will want to talk to the janitor, gain insights from them as well. But if you remove the power imbalance from the beginning, and I've seen it for myself, from my own conversations with people, if you remove the power imbalance, then you can have a level playing field and just play, share ideas, share principles. Then later we can bring in like, oh, actually, I do this for a living. Wow, that's incredible. Wow, I can't believe you would do that. Like someone that I can relate to is doing something so different than I am. So for me, that's part of in my principles that falls into nurturing as well. Nurturing self-love and honesty, because the labels that you put on yourself aren't the ones that society puts on you. They're not your name, which was given to you. They're not where you're from, which you didn't have a choice on, and they're not. I mean, like where you're from.
Where are you from?
Yeah, I don't know if you have a choice for that one. And I guess you could say I'm from this despite where you were born. And your job, like, sure, you kind of have a choice on that, but society tells you what your job is in this sense. But your principles are your choice. They are something that you've chosen to guide you. And you can begin to resonate with people based on that. Those are your core values. This is who I am. Not this, not that, not what everyone told me I'm supposed to be. This is who I am and who I'm trying to shape myself to be.
Yeah. And in the absence of principles, I think you kind of said this, but instead of being that horse with the blinders on and kind of having that direction, you end up in a world of infinite directions and basically somewhat lost, right? You're kind of just going where the wind blows. But having some sort of roots, being grounded, gives you not a path. It's a very broad path that can go in many directions, but it gives you some sense of belonging, I think, because now once again, those principles can help you identify the right groups to be part of, to invest your time and energy in. And in that sense, they are your guideposts. And it gives you some semblance of, I guess, control, which as humans we do kind of crave as well. So yeah, I think those are all important. So I think we've left a few tips. One of them is mantras for your principles, so you have a constant reminder of what they are. We talked about instead of approaching a conversation based on job, location, and name, you have a stronger conversation or a better, more relatable conversation, skipping the small talk, getting to the big talk.
The principles.
By talking about principles.
Or having conversations that will give you insights on that.
Exactly.
What are this person's principles?
Yeah, because even the sandcastle example, like you're talking about an activity or a behavior that goes past these kind of, like you said, societal labels, ones that have been given to you versus, hey, this is how I like to play. These are the things that interest me. So I think that's important. Any other tips or advice that come to mind when we talk about principles?
Well, I think we can have an activity for our audience, which is spend 30 minutes, just 30 minutes, and really write down or come up with your 5 core principles. They don't have to be the same ones that we have. They can be the same ones. We're all about heuristics. We're all about rules of thumb. We're all about principles. So what are your 5 core principles? Really think about it. And ask yourself, why do these matter to me? And do the people in my life reflect these principles? Do the people in my life that I admire have these qualities? Am I lacking some of this? Ask yourself, what are my 5 core principles? And when you talk to people, you'll start to see that these principles will naturally show up. And I would also add, try the game of don't ask questions like, where are you from? What's your name? What do you do? Instead, jump into conversations that align with your passions and their passions and see if you can squeeze out information about their principles.
Yeah. And I would suggest writing them down, because every time I think about them, sometimes I blank, and then Andres has to pull up my principles for me, which just feels a little weird and strange. But yeah, I think those are some of my main takeaways. I also spoke about some of my core principles and how they've been defined from the past. So I think you can also reflect on what's happen, what's really impacted you. I talked about the books, especially when it comes to decision making and avoiding analysis paralysis. Don't hesitate. So yeah, I think this was a good conversation. I think it's something for everyone to think about. You know, at 30 minutes is not much. And once again, I don't think this needs to be over-engineered. It's think about what comes to your mind, pick those core 5, and they're malleable. They will continue to get more nuanced. For example, I think be hospitable for me is a dangerous one, because at what price, right? At what point is that too far? I've overextended. I've sacrificed my other principles. So I see a world where that becomes more nuanced. It came to my mind. It's important to me. However, there's a push and pull balance. So yeah, as you're kind of formulating these, I encourage people to see the nuance and continue to reflect, continue to reinforce, because then you start to really define them. And I think once you have those core 5, as you were saying, the genius, you know, kind of to tie this back, the genius knows what they want. So then they can go get it. So as you start to have a clearer vision, you're able to fulfill those needs and become that aspirational version of yourself.